This week's episode is sponsored by Goldove's new science fiction horror film, Lumina, only in theaters Friday, July 12th. If you love government conspiracies, space, aliens, and some blood mixed with comedy, this is the movie many critics claim is the new cult classic on the block. There's no exaggeration there, because it really punches way above its weight. A terrifying sci-fi thrill ride, Lumina follows four friends desperately searching for their abductee friend in a dumb, deep underground military base. Whether they find their friend or not, what they find in the desert of the U.S. to the sands of the Sahara will change their lives forever. In his feature directing debut, Gino McCoy leads a cast that includes the legendary Eric Roberts, as well as up-and-coming talent Rupert Lazarus, Eleanor Williams, Andrea Tivadar, Sydney Nicole Rogers, Ken Lawson, and Emily Hill. Don't miss Lumina, only in theaters Friday, July 12th.
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't out-train her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
And welcome to Scare You to Sleep. I'm your host, Shelby Novak, and I'm here to read you a couple of bedtime stories. First up this week is an interesting little tale set in a diner. I love stories like this, just a conversation between two people about something so disturbing, inexplicable, and, well, you'll see. This is Anatomy of Apartment 11A by Mac Ralston. Tasselmeyer, who was the county medical examiner at the time, hadn't called the victim we found in the Serenity Towers, Apartment 11A, John Doe, even though we had no idea who he actually was. We had our guesses, sure, but nothing concrete. Nothing about 11A was concrete, except for the very walls themselves, I suppose. If only they could have told us what happened in there. No, Tasselmeyer called the victim the Frog, and we all just went along with it. I mean, it made sense to me. The guy had a long tongue. I'd later find out from Tasselmeyer himself, actually, that we all do, at least longer than what we see inside of our mouths. I had never seen one out in the open like that before. If I'm lucky, I never will again. No, Tasselmeyer called the victim the Frog because, well, before he was county medical examiner, he was a high school anatomy teacher. Then it started to make sense. They still do that? Peel him open, I mean. Tasselmeyer nodded, but never took his gaze off of me. I could see he was tired by the black rings around his eyes. He probably couldn't sleep. Hell, none of us could. Back when I was teaching, yeah, he eventually answered, though his voice had lost its usual captivating pitch in favor of a much more monotone mumble. Some of them still do it. Some of them do earthworms instead. Or a squid, or owl pellets. Owl pellets? He grumbled, almost as if he were trying to laugh, but couldn't produce the sound. Owl shit. Well, actually, the shit they yak up like a hairball. I chuckled, trying to elbow him into doing the same, but he didn't budge. Wouldn't be unlike the other shit they're teaching him in school. Tasselmeyer blankly nodded. Then he glanced down at his salad and probed at a stray onion with the end of his fork. He was never the type that'd lose his appetite, especially at Nina's and over a Cobb salad, but 11A had that effect. That's why I didn't even order anything but a Diet Cola. I still didn't drink it. Tasselmeyer went quiet for a long time, just picking at the speckles of egg in his salad. He hadn't shaved in over a week by the looks of it, and his glasses hung off his face to the point where I thought they might have ended up as a part of his lunch. "Why'd you leave?" Tasselmeyer looked up at me. I hadn't seen his eyes without his glasses much. It didn't look like him. "The school." He nodded. "I didn't feel like I made a difference." I had gone for my Diet Coke for the first time in the meal, but now I didn't want it anymore. "Whether you stayed or not?" Tasselmeyer nodded. "That and... well, forget it." "No, tell me." Tasselmeyer sighed. "That and... well, I didn't feel like I was making a difference." I nodded. I understood what he meant. You weren't being fulfilled. Finally, he laughed, albeit it was more of a croak. "I guess." "What do you mean?" "I mean, oh, come on, Blackmore. Does that shit even really matter?" "What? Fulfillment?" "Yeah," he said, still spinning his fork aimlessly. "Does it really matter if we're happy? If we're content?" I shrugged. "I'd like to think so." I could tell he agreed. "Did it matter for him?" "For who?" I asked. "The frog." I could see where he was going with this. I had led him right up and onto his soapbox, and he was ready to use it. "I mean, didn't he have dreams? Desires? A family?" "Not if we don't identify him," I joked. Tasselmeyer didn't return my smile. Instead, he returned his fork to the napkin alongside his plate, and then pushed it away. "You gonna finish that?" I pointed. "Are you?" I shook my head, and he nodded his. Nina's was quiet for such a morning, and the next words out of my mouth were deliberately softer because of that. "You couldn't fingerprint him? Blood sample?" "Wasn't any blood to sample. And it's hard to get prints when the skin isn't filled." "Like a rubber glove?" He nodded, only slightly. I sighed and wiped my chin. There was nothing else on it but sweat. "What about his teeth?" "What about him?" Tasselmeyer asked. "They were connected to his jawbone still, along with his full skeleton." "I mean, did they identify anything about him?" "Oh, sure," he continued. "How else do you think we know he was a he? Probably mid-30s, Caucasian. Didn't have any cavities, that's for sure." Tasselmeyer then stopped and puckered his unibrow in thought. He too was sweating. Who was living in 11A anyway? Landlord said it was vacant. Said they were turning it for the next tenants when the carpenters walked in on, well, you know. Jeez. Tasselmeyer swallowed, even though he hadn't eaten. I did the same and then leaned in toward him, trying my luck. What do you think happened, actually? He chuckled again. Hell if I know, Blackmore. I know you don't know, but what do you think? Who cares what I think? I do. He smiled a little at the end of his lips. I think we're dealing with something beyond our control here. Beyond our comprehension. Not a murder? He looked back at me sardonically, a brow raised. Then he leaned in and hushed back, making note of the old woman seated at the table 2 across from us. What kind of murderer dissects him like that? I shrugged. Didn't Dahmer? Yeah, till he ate him. And his dissections weren't like these, not even close. How come? The precision? Yeah, the fucking precision, he said, careful to keep his voice down. At least now it had some kind of life back into it. You ever seen anything like that? Nobody has. Said it yourself. He agreed, obviously. Every body system, perfectly intact, like a model kit. You remember those when you were a kid? What, the little anatomy ones? Tasselmeyer nodded. Skeletal system, respiratory system, nervous system, reproductive system. That one too, he agreed. You know where they found that one, don't ya? I raised my brows. Let me guess. Bedroom? Tasselmeyer pointed a tremoring finger at me. I then smiled at him with a morbid thought, and he welcomed me with his eyes to share it. Was the digestive one in the bathroom or the kitchen? Both, he said. The tongue started in the kitchen, and the anus made it all the way to the master bathroom. Jesus, I said. How long's that? About 30 feet or so, Tasselmeyer said. One long tube, like a bendy straw. I shot a glance toward my Diet Coke, even though the straw was straight, and then settled my eyes back onto Tasselmeyer. His chest was rising and falling heavily, to the point where the sound of his breathing made me want to omit my next question. I didn't. My heart was thumping, too. So if it wasn't murder, then what was it? Tasselmeyer asked, finishing my question. I nodded. Hell if I know, Blackmore. Hell if I know. Not an explosion? I asked. Perfectly intact, all of it. I nodded again. This time, I didn't have any more questions. Tasselmeyer sighed and looked around again. The old lady was gone. I have a theory. Let's hear it. Tasselmeyer chuckled throatily and drummed his fingers along the table. It's not a very good one. They said the same thing about the world being round. Tasselmeyer grinned. Fine, but this is off the record. I agreed. Richland County'll never know, for both our asses. Tasselmeyer continued. You familiar with prisms? You mean like those glass things? He nodded. Just like that. Like the triangular one on that album cover. Pink Floyd? Sure, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Tasselmeyer was never the kind for rock music. You know how the glass separates the white light into all the colors of the rainbow? Sure, I mimicked him. Tasselmeyer nodded with a faint curve on each pale cheek and raised his brows, telling me nothing and everything at the same time. Instead of answering any of my questions, he supplied me with a handful of new ones. Wait, what kind of prism are we talking about here? He shrugged. Hell if I know, Blackmore. I know, I said, cutting him off. I know, but you gotta know how those things work at least, right? Tasselmeyer ran his fingers through his hair, which was coarse and messy. I read up on it. And, he sighed. The different colors that make up plain old white light pass through the glass at different speeds. At an angle, they bend, and they all bend differently. And so, it makes a rainbow? Right, Tasselmeyer agreed. And so, what's that mean for the frog? What did you mean by something beyond our comprehension? Tasselmeyer laughed again. This time, though, the laugh was void of any humor in it. You don't mean something paranormal, do you? Who's to say? Well, for starters, you, I said, eyeing him carefully and making sure he wasn't going mad. Frankly, it was hard to tell. You're the doctor, after all. And you're the coroner. What difference does it make? About 4 years of medical school, actually. Tasselmeyer smiled. You don't believe in the paranormal? I was Catholic till I was 15. Does that count? Maybe. So you think God did it? I shook my head. Maybe he was going mad. Good. I agree, he said. Let's go down the list of possibilities. Scratch God off for now. All right, I said, going mad right along with him. So we're leaving science behind and embracing philosophy. If you say so, he said, smile returning. All right, what about aliens? What about him? Maybe they probed him, dissected him, like Jeffrey Dahmer, just cleaner. Perhaps. Keep going. I thought about it. Different dimensions? How so? Well, I'm not one for science fiction, I said. But isn't the general idea that you can teleport to other worlds, other realities that coincide with this one? Something like that, Tasselmeyer said. Well then, maybe, like your prism analogy, he just got split up. The muscles came through separately than the blood vessels or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm, he said. Except, no blood in them. Could be time travel then, too. And what? The blood's in a different time? Tasselmeyer shrugged. Maybe, I said, and as soon as I did, I realized just how far both of us had fallen down the rabbit hole. We were both going mad. Or maybe we already were. Anything else, Blackmore? Tasselmeyer asked. Is there anything else? He shrugged. Let's go back to God for a second. Seriously? He nodded. Not the Catholic one. The Hindu one. I raised one brow at him. Do the Hindus believe in God? Again, Tasselmeyer grinned. Don't get ahead of me, Blackmore. I raised my hands in innocence. By now, Nina's had completely cleared out. The late lunch crowd would be arriving soon. The Hindus believe that God, if you want to call it that, call it Brahman, is everything, and everything is God. All right, I said. I genuinely wasn't sure of where he was going with this. And if so, if everything is God, then so are we. I nodded. I guess I follow. I knew you'd keep up, he continued. If we're all God, we're all one in the same. They believe in this thing called samsara, reincarnation. That after I die, I come back as a butterfly or something else. Or someone else, Tasselmeyer added. I guess if you follow the logic to its logical conclusion, you'll eventually become everybody, everything. I leaned back in the chair that I had forgotten I was even sitting in. My face had gone numb too, and other than the beeping oven alarm in the kitchen nearby, the place was dead quiet. So you're saying that when I die, there's a chance I'll be born as you. And I'll be born as you, he added. But what difference does it make? What difference does it make to the frog? I said, trying to end the conversation. Not only did this rabbit hole run too deep, it was starting to frighten me in its depths. Tasselmeyer's smile disappeared under an expression of sheer confusion. It wasn't a face he wore often, or at least liked to. I don't fully know, he said, not looking directly at me. Maybe we just caught him at an intersection of time and space. Like those dimensions I mentioned? A bit, Tasselmeyer said. Maybe all of those lives run simultaneously. Maybe in one, he was fucking in his bed, and in another, taking a shit in the bathroom. Or yakking up a pellet that they dissect in a public high school, I joked. Tasselmeyer raised his brows, and while he knew I was only kidding, I couldn't tell if he felt the same. Or maybe it was just the aliens. He smiled. You gonna finish that Coke? I smiled back at him, as if I had just seen an old friend. I probably had. It's diet. Whatever, he said and took a swig. After a few moments of sucking it down and smacking his lips, I waited for him to say something else. Finally, he did, when he noticed the elephant in the room. Well, Blackmore, what are you gonna put down as the cause of death? Hell if I know, Tasselmeyer, I said. Hell if I know. And our final story of the evening is by Matthew Owen Jones, a returning author to the show. You may remember his story, episode 307, When the Light Goes Out, which is honestly one of my favorites I've ever done for the show. This week, he has for us Silent Skies. The constant hum of the Cessna's single engine had been the only sound for the last few hours, as Ruth's gaze strayed to the darkening skies outside the cockpit. The wilderness of spruce trees and frozen lakes below was slowly being swallowed by the approaching night. She suppressed a shiver and rubbed her shoulders against the chill. The cockpit had become cold without her realizing it. Tapping at the temperature gauge, she watched the needle slowly correct itself. The Cessna was an older plane with a few minor problems. She had recently bought it cheap from a salvage company that had recovered it after a crash. She figured it would pay for itself within a couple of years by making these supply runs over northern British Columbia. It would have to. Everything she owned was now invested in this plane. Reaching for her flask, she took a swallow of lukewarm coffee, trying to shake the lethargy that had settled upon her. It was easy to lose focus on these long night flights. In the soft glow of the cockpit light, Ruth checked her watch. 10:40 p.m. She had another 3 hours before she would reach Finlay Airport. Ruth flipped down the sun visor to shield against the last rays of sunlight from the western horizon. As she did so, something dropped to the floor, and she groped for it while trying to keep her eyes on the control panel. Picking it up, she saw it was a photograph of a smiling native woman posing in front of a small plane. The woman was older, with long dark hair and clearly the pilot. Behind her were 2 young girls that could be her children. Ruth recognized the tribal markings on the aircraft, identical to those painted on her own Cessna. She had heard someone died in the crash. It was the reason it was so cheap, but it was unnerving to see the face of the woman that shared the seat before her. She had suspected the salvage team must have done a rush job patching the plane back up. Now, she was certain. Swearing beneath her breath, she wondered what else they had missed. With a grimace, Ruth crumpled the old photo and tossed it aside. She had learned it was best not to dwell on the past. Leaning back, she lit up a cigarette as a comfort against the cold and watched the ribbons of smoke curl around the cabin. She always enjoyed the solitude up here, so far above the bustle below. Being alone was something she was good at. The plane shook as it entered some turbulence, causing Ruth to grip the steering yoke. A little turbulence was not unusual above the lakes, which would take her an hour to clear if the weather continued to hold. Behind her, she heard the shifting weight of crates as they slid around in the back. Some of the straps that secured her cargo must have come loose. With a frustrated sigh, she checked the airspeed, then put the plane into autopilot and clambered out of the pilot chair. Ruth ducked her head below the low roof and made her way to the back of the plane. The body length of the aircraft was only a few yards long, narrowing further onto the tail. She had removed the 2 passenger seats to better adapt the plane to carry cargo, but even so, it was cramped. Back here, further away from the cockpit heater, it was dark and even colder. Ruth could even see her warm breath visible in the dim light. The section was lit only by a single malfunctioning bulb flickering intermittently. She braced her hand against the plane as it trembled in the rough air, and, moving among the assortment of food crates and oil drums, she located the one that had worked its way loose and retightened the straps. As Ruth turned back toward the cockpit, she glimpsed something crouched in the shadows. She froze in place, a chill running down her spine. Nobody could be on board but her. There wasn't enough room to stow away. She forced herself to turn and confront her fear, the cigarette almost falling from her lips. To her relief, all she saw was a bundle of winter clothing. Ruth released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding as the tension left her. She had been driving herself too hard lately, trying to make this investment pay off. Returning to the cockpit, she tried to shake the unsettling feeling that clung to her. Around her, the plane continued to shudder in the rough air, and she sank back into her chair, slipping her seatbelt on as a precaution. She immediately noticed the plane banking slightly. Ruth straightened her course and felt resistance as it persistently pulled back to the left. Each time she corrected it, she could feel it stubbornly veer left once more. Looking out the window toward the wing, she confirmed her concern. The ailerons were frozen or seized up. Fuck! She couldn't catch a break in her whole damn life. The plane was veering off her intended route and headed further into the Lake District. After a long hesitation, she reached for the radio. "This is flight CFTAB to Finlay Airport. Do you copy? Over." Only the buzz and hiss of the radio filled the silence. "This is flight CFTAB. I am off course and have technical problems. Can you advise? Over." She repeated her call and was met by the crackle of static before she eventually heard a response.
Flight CFTAB, this is Finley. We hear you, but barely. There is a lot of interference. What is the nature of your problem? Over.
"My ailerons are seized. I can't maintain my flight path. Over." A long pause followed her words before the older male voice replied,
Flight CFTAB, we see you are not so far off your flight path. Do the best you can, and we will alert nearby airports that you may need to land early. We will continue to monitor this channel. Finley, over and out.
"Well, thanks for nothing, Finley." Ruth slammed the radio back on its hook and stubbed out the last of her cigarette. She was on her own, as always. But maybe Finley was right. Maybe she could correct her course and not lose much time. As the night progressed, the cold at the back of the cabin seemed to seep forward. There might be a hole back there somewhere. Putting on her fleece jacket, she repeatedly toggled the air conditioner in an effort to get some warmer air. While fiddling with it, Ruth noticed something tangled in the grill. Carefully, she tugged at it and held it up to the light, revealing a long strand of black hair. Ruth winced in disgust. The grill was clogged solid with the stuff. She couldn't understand how so much hair could get back there. It would take years of accumulation. She was reminded of the dark-haired woman in the photo and dropped the strand with a shudder. After a lifetime of relying on no one but herself, Ruth didn't spook easily, but she was beginning to wish she'd never bought this plane. Far below her, the network of lakes that spanned hundreds of kilometers was swallowed by darkness, appearing as a great, flat stillness. The familiar landmarks were harder to see at night, but she knew the plane continued to drift further west, deeper into the Lake District. Below her, the lights of small, scattered communities became more infrequent and then disappeared almost entirely. It was a wilderness down there. The glass of the cockpit registered a movement behind her, causing the hairs on the back of her neck to prickle with unease. She had checked the cargo. Nothing could be moving back there. Slowly, she turned her head, looking toward the rear of the plane. At first, she saw nothing except the supplies. Then, something drew her gaze to the shadows around the crates. A black-haired woman with tribal tattoos on her chin sat barely visible in the dark, a veil of tangled hair partly concealing her face. She was naked and dripping with filthy water, as though she had just climbed out of a swamp, silent and still as a corpse. Although it was impossible, she somehow knew it was the same woman she had seen in the photo. Ruth found herself shaking, unable to tear her gaze away from the terrifying figure. Blindly fumbling behind her, she reached for the handheld radio and clicked the transmitter open with a trembling hand. Finley, there is something on the plane with me. Her breathless voice was met only by the crackle of static. Someone, please, The last words tumbled from her lips like a broken whisper. The dim bulb above the cargo section flickered and went out, plunging the rear of the plane into darkness. With only the cockpit light, Ruth could no longer see anything back there beyond the nearest bundles of winter clothing. But she still could not look away from the darkness, and the thing she knew was concealed within it. Ruth found herself trembling with breath that came in ragged gasps. A slow trickle of water seeped forward along the floor, originating from among the cargo, where she had seen the figure. In the cockpit light, the water looked foul and dark, carrying with it a putrid stench. Ruth's consciousness eventually registered the regular beeping of an alarm, which had been activated behind her. Wrenching her attention back to the dashboard, she saw she had lost half her altitude and was descending sharply. She yanked back on the steering yoke, but found it resisted her effort. A glance down showed her more dark strands of hair had emerged from beneath the control panel and wrapped around the steering column. Even as she watched, it writhed and snaked tighter around the shaft. Further strands trickled from between the panel and the cockpit roof, spilling downward in long, wet threads. Ruth recoiled from them, suppressing the scream that rose in her throat as she fought for control of the plane. The aircraft refused to rise outside the window and uncomfortably close below. She could see treetops spreading past. The noise from the engine dipped and began to splutter before cutting out completely. All the sounds suddenly disappeared. Only the wind rushing outside the cockpit was audible as the Cessna glided lower in the night sky. Despite the imminent danger, a cold breath on the back of her neck made Ruth instantly stiffen. The thing was behind her. The plane and its problems faded into insignificance. Trembling, Ruth turned and stared at the hungry darkness. The rear light flickered, briefly illuminating the pale corpse of a face inches from her own, where the woman's eyes should be. Only hollow sockets remained. The figure's mouth stretched wide in a silent scream as foul water dribbled from its gaping maw. Ruth's scream was cut short as the plane slammed into the dark surface of the lake. Her senses were engulfed in an explosion of sound and pain. Then, the icy embrace of the water claimed her. The diver surfaced and, lifting his mask, signaled a thumbs up to the rest of the waiting salvage crew.
Okay, haul her up.
At the shouted command, the handful of men paused to watch the lake where the chains disappeared into the water. The mechanical arm of the crane groaned under the strain, and in a cascade of water, the wreckage of the plane broke the surface. Despite being covered in weeds and mud, the single-engine Cessna remained relatively intact, with only shattered windows and a broken propeller. The younger man whistled in surprise.
It's a miracle she's in one piece.
Together they watched the water drain from the body of the craft, as the crane slowly maneuvered the wreck onto the back of the flatbed truck. The stony-faced older man shared a grim smile.
Fortunate for us. It still has some value. She might even be able to fly after restoration work. We can probably patch her up and sell her on.
Despite the welcome news, the older man had a peculiar, uneasy look as he supervised the work.
You know what's really strange, kid? Won't be the first time we have patched this one up. It was the same area of the lakes that this plane was dredged from just a year ago. Real tragedy. Mother, her Her 2 children killed in the crash. Only the body of the female pilot was found to be buried. The dead girls were never recovered.
Shaking his head, the older man added,
I don't know how any mother could rest easy, even in her grave, knowing her children were still out there somewhere.
Huddled in their jackets, both men exchanged solemn looks as a chill breeze swept across the placid water. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much to my 2 authors this week, Mac Ralston and Matthew Owen Jones. I hope you liked this episode. I really enjoyed putting it together for you. If you like the show and you'd like to follow along on social media, you can find the show at Scare You to Sleep on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you'd like to follow my personal accounts, you can find me at Shelby B. Novak on all those platforms as well. Speaking of social media, I put out a little teaser for the next Guided Nightmare. So Guided Nightmare fans, if you go check out any of my social media, you'll see, again, a little teaser for the next Guided Nightmare episode. If you have a story you'd like considered for the show, please send it to scareyoutosleep@gmail.com. I'm going to be putting together some submission guidelines soon. I know I've been asked for them for years, and I've been a little too loosey-goosey. One thing I will say, please do not copy and paste your story into the body of the email. I really, really prefer if it's a separate document, even if it's a link to a Google Doc, that is fine. But something about it being copied and pasted into the body of the email, it's so hard to read. The formatting always gets thrown off. And so that's just one I'll throw out there for you right now. If you'd like to listen to this show ad-free, or if you'd like some bonus content, please go check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/scareyoutosleep. For as little as $1 a month, you can get ad-free episodes, and for $3 and up, you get bonus episodes. Of course, please don't feel obligated to do this, but I do appreciate every single one of my patrons so much. It really keeps this ghost train a-rolling. So, again, that's patreon.com/scareyoutosleep. Also, please go check out my new merch. It's so great. I'm going to post pictures soon of the merch that I personally got. I don't know if that's weird to get my own merch, but I do like getting samples and things because I want to make sure I'm giving you a quality product. And oh my God, I'm so happy with it. I got an apron that's embroidered with Scare You to Sleep on it, and it's beautiful embroidering. I'm very happy with the colors and everything. I got a glass that is like one of those can-shaped glasses, and so fun. I actually posted a picture of that in my Instagram stories today, and it might be gone by the time you go look, and I also got a Meet Me at the Haunted Lighthouse t-shirt, which I changed the font of from the last iteration of the shirt, and I like it a whole lot more. There's a link to the merch store in my show notes, and I don't know if I mentioned it here or on Patreon, but one thing I really like about this new merch company, Fourth Wall, is it gives me the option to send you a thank you video after, and I've been having so much fun sending thank you videos to every single person who purchases merchandise. It's been great. It feels so personal, and I've gotten really good feedback. I think it's a nice little surprise for people to get a video. I've never seen that before from a merch site, that option, and it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, go check out my merch. There's all kinds of different stuff there. There's a Scare You to Sleep pillow. There's Haunted Lighthouse merchandise. There's still O'Male Swamp Tour merchandise, and there's just all kinds of different options for things. It's a lot of fun. All right, enough of me plugging all that away. I think I got to all the important stuff, but here's a little bit of the ramble at the end. Again, if you don't want to listen to me ramble, that is completely understandable, and you may turn off I'm not your boss. I'm not your dad. You can turn off this show whenever you want. But of course, I'm just letting you know that the ramble is beginning now, and I will tell you what I baked this week. This week I made some espresso chocolate chip cookies. It's one of my favorite recipes. I've sent it to many people who've asked for it, so feel free to drop me an email or a DM. And if I hopefully see it, I'm more likely to see an email. But if I see your DM, I'll definitely send it to you. And I did that on Sunday to celebrate a very big mark in my life. So yay to putting an end to things. That's how I'll put it. An official end to things and on to new beginnings. So I made those, and I also just felt like something lemony this week. So I made a batch of lemon curd, which is very easy, by the way. And I've never bought lemon curd. I've only ever made it because I didn't really get into citrus flavors until I was really into baking. And so I've never bought lemon curd, but making it's very, very quick and easy. And oh my God, I've been basically just putting it on everything. I've been mixing it with Greek yogurt a lot. And it's, oh my God, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Just like a dollop of lemon curd on top of a dollop of Greek yogurt, mix it together, throw in a raspberry, throw in a blueberry. There you go. It's so good. And I'm not one for quote unquote like skinny desserts where they like replace all the good stuff with like Greek yogurt and protein powder. Like, good on you if you like that stuff. I'm just not usually a very big fan of it. But lemon curd and Greek yogurt is the most perfect combination. So I just wanted to put that out there. If you think I'm putting out like, oh man, is she just trying to shill us on her weird diet recipes? That is not what I'm doing. I just so happen to have Greek yogurt. I actually make this pie a lot, this lemon supreme pie that you've definitely heard me mention before. And that uses cream cheese mixed with the lemon. And I didn't have cream cheese, but I did have Greek yogurt. And I was like, well, this is gonna happen. It's fine. It'll be okay. It wasn't just okay. It was phenomenal. I can't even tell you how many times since I made this lemon curd I've had a little like cup of Greek yogurt and lemon curd. It's a problem. It's a problem. I'm thinking about freezing the rest of the lemon curd because I'm gonna turn into a lemon curd. I also realized you can curd a lot of other things. I literally Googled what other fruits can you curd. I don't think curd is a verb, but I turned it into one. And it turns out you can curd so many things. And I'm very excited to curd things in the future. Cranberries, mangoes, all the citrus, of course. I think this is the summer of curd. It's curd summer, everyone. I've declared it. So go curd some things. I recommend starting with lemons if you've never done it before. Again, it's very easy. One thing I realized that would be very, very good as I was devouring my curd is maybe like a lemon curd creme brulee, like making the custard, putting the lemon curd, a layer of lemon curd on top, making sure to really refrigerate it so it's all very like set, and then doing the creme brulee. Oh my God. Or, the sugar and then bruleeing that. You know what I mean? Oh my God. I think that would be fan-fucking-tastic. I'm not kidding. I just have not had the will to do it. One thing, creme brulee is my favorite dessert. That or s'mores. I can't decide. I know, very basic. Look, what can I say? I like what I like. But creme brulee, I love it so much. Again, one of my favorite desserts, but I have a problem making it because I hate waiting for it. I always end up making it when I'm like wanting it now. I'm very bad at recipes that you need to wait for like a day or so. Sorry, there's a big truck driving by if you hear that. Like even like fermented pizza doughs. I know like I've made overnight like focaccia and pizza dough and stuff, and it tastes so much better because you let the yeast kind of ferment overnight. And I'm so bad about it though. I'm really impatient when it comes to baked goods. I don't know how people do it. I don't know. Anyway, that's my baking ramble for the week. So yes, on to new beginnings, which I've said so many times, but this is like legally, on to new beginnings. Legally, my name is Shelby Novak again, so hello. Nice to meet you. I'm Shelby Novak. And I'm gonna go. I think this was long enough, and I'll see you elsewhere. I'll see you probably the next time I'll see you would be the Guided Nightmare. So, good night. Sleep tight. That's not what I say. Go get some sleep. Sweet dreams.